right. Welcome, everybody. We're just going to give a quick minute to make sure everyone gets connected here, and then we'll get going. Still see a bunch of people coming in. We appreciate you guys being here. Um, Looking forward to this webinar today. All right, we still got some people connecting, looking pretty strong. All right. Looks like everyone should be connected, so we'll get going here. Um, my name is Nick Leonardi. I'm with Utility Business Media, and I want to welcome you to today's sponsored webinar with OK Alone. Today we have with us Ryan and Scott, who are both VPs of Sales at OK Alone, as well as Antonio, who's a safety specialist with Hudson Gas and Electric. Today's topic, we are covering field team safety, connected protection for isolated and remote workers. We encourage you to stop by the booth at the upcoming IP Utility Safety Conference and Expo in Glendale, Arizona. This webinar will be recorded and available 24 hours after the webinar concludes, posted on incident-prevention.com. Please ask all questions in the Q&A panel as we go, and we'll answer them at the conclusion of the webinar. And then proof of attendance will be sent from Zoom directly 24 hours after this webinar concludes. And with that, I hand it over to you guys. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you as well. Thank you all again for being here. We're going to keep this tight, practical, and directly relevant to your world. So let's dive in. All right. I want to start today with a scenario. I want you to sit with it for a moment before we get into anything else. It's Tuesday afternoon. One of your field technicians, someone who has been with you guys for 7 years or so, someone who knows the job better than almost anyone, heads out into a routine job, substation work. He's done it 100 times. Schedule says you should be back at 3:30. 4:15 hits. Someone notices he hasn't checked in. 4:30, text him, call him, no response. 5 hits. Now we're not sure whether to escalate this or wait. 5:45, hey, we just send somebody. Finally, someone drives to the site. Unfortunately, the individual, he's got a medical event. He's been on the ground for almost 2 hours. He survived. But the window between when something went wrong and when your organization knew about it, that window is the entire problem we are here to talk about today. Because that story is not rare. And the organizations that have closed that gap aren't the biggest ones in the industry. They're just the most deliberate. That scenario in some version happens at utility organizations across North America, everywhere and around the world, every week. That gap between when something goes wrong in the field and when the organization knows about it, that gap is the problem we are here to solve today. I'm Scott Whitty with OK Alone. We work with utility organizations, municipalities, and field service companies around the world, and really just focused on to close that gap with a structured lone worker safety workflow. For those of you already running Geotab across your fleet, we integrate directly. So there's no new hardware, no new ecosystem, super simple. More importantly, I'm joined here today by Antonio De Martino. Thank you very much for being here. He is a certified safety professional from Central Hudson who has actually implemented this inside his utility organization. You're going to hear firsthand and from someone that is sitting in your exact chair. All right, in the next 10 minutes, we're going to cover what the data says about where the real risk sits, where traditional safety processes break down, and what a practical workflow looks like that your team will actually use. By the end of this, you will know exactly whether this is relevant to your organization and what path forward looks like if this is it. But before we dive into that, I want to hear from you. Let's dive into a quick poll question. All right, so the question is, what is your biggest challenge when managing worker safety? We'll give you all about 60 seconds or so to answer this poll question. We appreciate all of your feedback. And oh, I'm getting the question as well.
All right, you got a couple more seconds if you guys want to get your answers in. Looks about 63% have participated so far, and then we'll share those results with everyone.
All right. Thank you all for the feedback here. So worker engagement, adoption, and there we go. Ensuring timely response in incidences. Perfect. Appreciate all of that feedback. Visibility and response time is usually one of the keys to we see for success and as a major pay point. All right. That story that I opened up with, a worker alone, no one knowing for 2 hours, that is not an outlier, as I mentioned. The data tells us why. The Bureau of Labor Statistics records over 2.5 million non-fatal workplace injuries and illnesses every year in the US. In the utility sector, injury rates sit consistently above the national average. Field teams are carrying a disproportionate share of that risk. So you guys are a higher risk in that situation. But here's what makes that number worth paying attention to right now specifically. The type of risk has not fundamentally changed. What has changed is how it's being experienced. Engineers are covering large territories, handling a wider range of tasks, and doing more of it alone. One person moving through a remote substation, a roadside job, a customer on-premise location, and a live fault response in a single shift. Four completely different environments, four completely different risk profiles, and in each one, very often, no one close by. Risk has not increased in type, it has increased in concentration at the individual level with less immediate support available when something changes. That is a shift sitting behind every conversation happening in this industry right now, and is exactly what we are here to address today. So, what does a field engineer's day actually look like? Not in theory, in practice. It rarely looks like one controlled environment. Most engineers are moving, remote substations in the morning, customer site in the afternoon, roadside job on the way back. Three completely different environments, three completely different risk scenarios in a single shift. In remote locations, you have limited communication, difficult access, and if something goes wrong, response time, real time, is sometimes limited. In public-facing environments, the technical risk might be lower, but something else increases: human unpredictability. And then there is the customer on premise. This one I want you to sit for a moment. Your engineer pulls up to an address. They have never seen the site before, never been out to the customer, first time. They don't know the layout. They don't know who else is going to be there. They're alone. And there's no way to fully anticipate what they're walking into. Before they walk into it, what connects all these situations is one thing: no immediate supervision. The engineer is making real-time decisions, managing the technical task, and managing their own safety simultaneously, alone. The challenge is not simply the presence of risk, it is the variety and unpredictability of it across a single day, and the fact that safeguards designed for one environment were never built for the next one. And one category of risk within that has come into much sharper focus over the last few years. All right, one of those risk categories that has shifted most in recent years is public-facing risk. That deserves its own conversation because it behaves completely different than every other risk your engineers face. Think about what the work actually looks like from the outside. A crew blocking a road during an outage response, a technician working on infrastructure outside a commercial premise, engineer knocking on a door to access a customer site. In each of these situations, the work itself creates disruption. It delays people, blocks access, causes frustration, and frustration under the right conditions escalates. Here's what makes this category of risk so difficult to manage. Technical hazards can be identified, assessed, and controlled. You can engineer out a fall risk. You can create a protocol for a confined workspace, but you can't engineer out human behavior. You can't predict what someone will do when they're having a bad day, or one of the engineers is standing in between them and where they need to go in that exact moment. This is not anecdotal. The Bureau of Labor Statistics records over 50,000 non-fatal incidences involving violence or aggression in US workplaces every year. Many result in lost time. Many more go unreported. Now, layer alone working on top of that, no colleague to step in, no immediate backup, no one watching. A situation that starts a minor friction can move very quickly. And if there is no reliable way for that engineer to signal that something is changing, your organization finds out after the fact. That is a fundamentally different safety challenge. Not prevention, but making sure your people have a fast, reliable way to raise the alarm the moment something happens before it gets worse. All right, public-facing risk gets more attention than it used to. But the environmental risks, the ones that have always been part of this work, have not gone anywhere. In many cases, they have quietly intensified. Think about the conditions your engineers are regularly working in. Harsh weather, difficult terrain, sites that require long drives down unmaintained roads, specialty access, or significant travel time just to reach that location. These are not edge cases. For many utility teams, this is a standard Tuesday. And here's what makes those environments so consequential from a safety perspective. If something goes wrong, distance compounds everything. Emergency response takes longer. There may be no one nearby to assist. The window between an incident occurring and help arriving is wider than it would be in almost any other working environment. And that window is where the outcome is decided. Then add communication. Signals drop off quickly in rural locations, underground and inside certain structures. That is a that's not a minor inconvenience. It directly affects an engineer's ability to do the one thing they need to do when something goes wrong, tell someone. If the phone doesn't work, the radio does not reach, and there's no automatic way to raise an alert, that engineer is completely isolated at that exact moment they need support the most. These risks are well understood. They're not new. What changes when you layer isolation on top of unreliable communication is the severity of what follows. The margin for delayed response becomes very narrow and very unforgiving, which is exactly why, when these conditions are combined with the public-facing pressures we just discussed, the question of what happens when something goes wrong becomes the most important question in the room. All right. So when you bring these together, remote environment, public-facing exposure, a lone worker with no immediate backup, the question that matters most is not just what is the risk. It is what happens when something goes wrong. Because in a lone working situation, the challenge is rarely only the incident itself. It is the gap, the time between when something happens and when anyone in your organization knows about it. Think about what that actually looks like. An engineer becomes injured or capacitated or feels genuinely threatened and cannot safely reach for their phone in that exact moment. And then there's no colleague who notices, no supervisor who sees anything is off, no automatic signal something has changed. Nothing. And that gap is measured in minutes, sometimes in hours, is where the outcomes are decided. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is consistent on this point. Delayed response is one of the most significant factors in determining how serious an incident becomes. The same event with a 2-minute response looks completely different from that same event with a 2-hour response. Most organizations find out when someone doesn't check in or when they don't come back. That is the gap we were talking about. And the reason it matters so much is this. Risk management in field operations is not only about prevention. Prevention is critical, but no system eliminates risk entirely. The question you also have to answer is when something happens to one of your people today, how quickly does your organization know? And how quickly can you act? That's the question that exposes where most safety systems are actually falling short. And to understand why that gap exists, even in organizations with strong safety cultures, it is worth looking at where the process itself starts to break down. Why does the gap exist? Even in organizations with strong safety cultures, experienced supervisors, and genuine commitment to getting this right, because most safety processes were designed for conditions that do not reflect the reality we just described. The most common model still in use is manual check-ins. An engineer calls or sends a message, text message, WhatsApp to a supervisor, set intervals to confirm they're okay. On paper, it works. In practice, it carries a structural flaw that most organizations have never fully examined. It only works if the engineer can check in. If they're delayed, they miss it. If they're distracted, they miss it. If they're injured, incapacitated, or in a situation where reaching for a phone is not safe, the process fails completely. And here's the critical part. It fails silently. There's no alarm. There's no automatic signal that something is wrong. The only indicator is an absence, a missed check-in, someone on the other side doesn't notice or act on. That is a significant dependency on a chain of human attention. In an environment where supervisors are already stretched, that's a lot. Research shows that managers spend up to 88% of their working week on communication activities, nearly 10 hours a week on email and messaging alone. In a manual safety system, a meaningful portion of that time is consumed chasing updates, calling engineers to confirm, hey, are you okay? Following up on missed check-ins, managing a process that was never designed to be efficient. And then there's the communication layer underneath all of it. The phones, radios, your engineers depend on to check in and raise an alert. They are signal dependent. In the exact environments where risk is highest, remote sites, underground, rural locations, those tools are less reliable. The result is a system that functions well under normal conditions and begins to break down in precisely the environments where it needs to hold most. That's not a people problem. It's not a design problem. It points directly to the gap we need to close. All right, everything we've covered today points to the same place. When your safety process depends on manual check-ins, limited real-time visibility, and communication tools that rely on signal, there is an inherent vulnerability built in the design. The process functions under normal conditions, and it begins to fail in exactly the environments where your people are most exposed. An engineer in a low signal area cannot check in. An engineer who is injured cannot raise an alert. Supervisor managing a full team may not notice a missed check-in until the window for an effective response has already closed. And what is important to understand is this, that is not a failure of people. Everyone in that chain is doing exactly what the process asked them to do. The process itself has the flaw, and that flaw only becomes visible when something has already gone wrong. Closing that gap does not mean adding more steps, more administration, more pressure on supervisors who are already stretched thin. That would make it worse. It means building something more reliable, a structured safety workflow that works automatically, consistently, and in the environments where your engineers actually operate, not just the ones the process was designed for. Automated check-ins, real-time visibility, a clear escalation path that triggers the moment something changes without depending on anyone remembering to follow the right steps at the right moment. That is what a practical lone worker safety solution looks like in the field. I'm going to hand it over to Ryan now. Thank you for your time. He's going to show you exactly what this looks like.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. So we'll talk about, what good safety looks like. And in that poll that Scott shared earlier, it looked like 40 or 41% of the responses was adoption is a huge component for you all when dealing with worker safety. Um, and really the big thing with that is including your lone workers, your workers out in the field in your processes for working alone. And what we've seen over the years is that helps increase adoption and usage, whether that's a platform or just an internal process that you're building out. And really, what you just heard what really highlights the gap between how safety is often designed and what's actually needed in the field. So, when we look at what works in practice, effective safety isn't about adding more and more policies. It's about having clear, repeatable processes that are built into day-to-day operations. And that really means that employees understand their responsibilities and really what's exactly expected of them. And supervisors have that clear view of what's happening across their team. So it also means those processes work consistently, and whether someone is operating in a remote location, entering a customer's premise, or dealing with a more complex or higher risk task, it's really at its core is good safety. It's about having clarity, consistency, and visibility, and that's making sure that the right information is available at the right time so that action can be taken quickly when needed. Time to response is the most important thing, like Scott mentioned. We want to make sure that if someone's in need of help, that we have a process or structure in place to address those. So with the first step in the process is structured check-ins. So starting with check-ins, this is often the foundation of any lone worker safety process. In practice, the key is to move away from fixed or manual check-ins and towards something that's more structured and adaptable to the level of risks that they face out in the field. And that means setting regular check-in intervals, but also having the flexibility to shorten those intervals when the level of risk increases. So they're working in hazardous, high-risk areas, working in harsh environments, and whether that's due to the task or the environment, or really the situation of the technician is entering. So this removes the reliance on the memory or manual reporting, and instead it creates a consistent process that runs in the background of the working day. It also proves an early signal when something isn't right. If it's a check or a check-in is missed, the immediate visibility and can be acted on, and rather than going unnoticed for a few hours potentially. And the second step is having an effective escalation. So once you have structured check-ins in place, the next step is making sure there's a clear and reliable escalation process when something doesn't go to plan. And a missed check-in or a help alert should immediately trigger an escalation sequence, not just a notification, but a defined set of actions. So that might start with attempting to contact the worker first, then notify a supervisor or team member, continuing through a defined escalation chain until someone actively acknowledges and takes responsibility for those alerts that occur. In a more advanced setup, this could include what's often called an alert loop. So that means where notifications continue to escalate across multiple contexts until the alert is accepted. And that really removes the risk of a single message or unavailable contact stopping the response. We want to create a level of redundancy in your procedures that, if someone's not available at that time, that it immediately gets escalated to that next line of communication or command. And then there's also flexibility in how this is managed. So some organizations route alerts to internal teams if you have the support to do that. While others are using dedicated safety monitoring centers that can assess the situation and, if needed, contact emergency services directly to the person's live location. So the key point is that the response is structured, it's repeatable, and it doesn't rely on something or someone noticing something and deciding what to do. It's already defined and it activates immediately. That flexibility allows organizations to tailor escalations based on those levels of risk, and ensuring that when someone needs help, there's a clear and reliable path to get to it. And in situations where clear or that cellular coverage is limited, this can also support by alternative communication methods such as satellite-enabled devices, so using devices like Zoleo or Garmin. And that's helping ensure alerts can still be sent and then received when traditional networks aren't available at that time. And then the third and final step is having supervisor visibility. So third part of the workflow is that visibility, and that's making sure that supervisors have a clear and real-time view of what's happening across the teams. In many traditional setups, visibility is limited or delayed, but when supervisors may only become aware of an issue when an engineer checks in late or doesn't check in at all at the end of their day, potentially. A more effective approach is having a live view of the worker's status, their location, and activity throughout the shift. And that allows supervisors to quickly understand, one, who's working, where they are, and whether everything is progressing as expected. Importantly, this isn't something that needs to be actively monitored every minute of the day. The system should really just be running in the background in an ideal world, and that's keeping information up to date. So that's when something changes or attention is needed. The most recent and relevant information is immediately available, so you can act on those alerts or notifications that come through. And this becomes valuable when something does happen. So if a missed check-in occurs or an alert is triggered, supervisors aren't starting from scratch. They already have context around the worker's last known status, location, maybe potentially where they've traveled from. So you have additional context really leading into what may have happened. And then it also supports earlier intervention. So visibility isn't just about responding to incidents, it's about identifying when something doesn't look right and taking action before it escalates. And ultimately, this creates a much more informed and confident response based on real-time insights rather than incomplete information that you might have had previously. Planning for high risk work. So once the core workflow is in place, the next step is thinking about how it's applied in different situations, particularly higher risk work, which a lot of you on this call and in your workforce, or I assume you do a good amount of high risk work. Not every task carries the same level of risk, so it's important to be able to identify when additional protection is needed. And that could be working in a remote location, entering those customer premises like we talked about, responding to an outage, or carrying out more complex or hazardous work or tasks. And in those situations, the approach can always be adjusted. So this might mean shortening those check-in intervals, increasing that visibility, or ensuring escalation pathways are more immediate. So by shortening those check-in intervals, you know that an action is going to be formed a lot quicker in those high risk or hazardous situations. And the key is that it doesn't rely on ad hoc decision making. It's planned in advance. You know what's happening, and employees know what to expect of them. And then the supervisors also understand how that activity will be monitored. And this really creates a more proactive approach to safety, where the level of protection is aligned to the level of risks that they face, rather than being the same for every situation. We understand people work in different environments, so having some flexibility is essential in building out your procedures. And then, in addition to the environmental and task-based risks, public-facing work requires a slightly different kind of preparation. So, when engineers are working in public spaces or entering customer premises, they're operating in environments that are less controlled and more unpredictable. The risks in these situations are often behavioral rather than technical risks. So, why it's important to build awareness into your processes is employees need to understand the type of situations where risk may increase, whether that's dealing with frustrated customers, working in a busy public area, or responding to time-sensitive issues. It's also important that they have a clear and simple way to raise concerns or request support if a situation starts to change. That could be through check-ins, triggering help alerts, or another escalation route that's easy to access for them in those situations. And in some cases, they may also include more discrete options. So, such as triggering an alert through a gesture like tapping the back of their phone, shaking the device, allowing workers to request help without drawing attention to themselves, especially when you're public facing and you don't want the person that you're dealing with to know that you're in need of distress or help. It's always good to have discrete options really, when facing the public. And then from a planning perspective, these activities should be recognized as higher risk. So that allows the level of monitoring and support to be adjusted accordingly, rather than treating them as the same as a routine task. And this aim isn't to remove these risks entirely. That's not always possible, but it's to make sure crew members are better prepared, better supported, and able to get help quickly if they need it. So when you bring all these elements together, those structured check-ins, clear escalation paths, and real-time visibility, you start to move from a reactive approach to something much more consistent and proactive. Safety really becomes a part of the day-to-day workflow that you've already built out, rather than something that sits alongside it and relies on those manual processes. And that consistency is important. It means the same approach can be applied across different teams, different shifts, environments, and whether someone is working remotely, entering a customer's premise, or carrying out higher risk tasks. It also reduces the reliance on individuals or to remember what to do or recognize when something isn't right. And the process is already in place, so running in the background and ready to respond when needed. So having those high, time to response is important. And the result is really having a safer workforce, more reliable way of working, where staff feel supported, supervisors have better visibility into what their teams are doing, and organizations are better equipped to meet their duty of care. And importantly, it creates a foundation that can adapt to risk changes throughout their day, rather than needing to rethought, what is this new environment they're going into? What's the new situation? And do we have to build out a completely new process? Because it can always be adapted based on that framework. And now let's see how this all works in real world conditions. So I'm going to pass
Good
this over to.
afternoon, good morning. My name is Antonio DiMartino. Like Scott introduced me, I'm the safety specialist here at Central Hudson. Just a little background on me. I've been doing safety for about 11 years now. I started in the construction industry down in New York City, and then I moved upstate to the Hudson Valley, where I joined up with Central Hudson, and I've been working with them for a little while now. So Central Hudson is a utility company. We supply both gas and electric, where we have about 1,300 employees, and 250 to 300 of them work alone either daily or at some frequency throughout the week. And our problem was, well, it's what are the logistics on how do we keep tabs of them? The story that Scott was talking about in the earlier in the slideshow about what happens when someone goes down and then it's, oh no, it's 4:15, where's Joe? That's something that we were really concerned about as we were going through our lone worker program. So we were looking for a good logistical solution, and that's where we came across OK Alone. um, and part of that was being able to keep tabs on our workers, know where their location are, and have a quick response time. So the way we did it is we focused on high energy tasks. So some tasks, you know, you're not doing too much. You're just out there, checking on things, looking on things. But sometimes you're working with high energy. And what do I mean by high energy? We're talking the Electrical Edison Institute's definition of high energy. So that is where we require our OK Alone and be able to keep tabs on our workers, because that's where we feel the highest risk is. So our rollout. So I want to talk on this a little bit more because I saw the poll and you guys were talking about engagement and adoption. So I'll speak on that a little bit more, how we pulled that off to get our employees engaged in it, and how we got them to really work with the tool. We did a bit of a slower rollout, group by group. We focused on our groups that were their daily task are alone every day, all day, and all their tasks are high energy. So we had subject matter experts from each group sit down, test out the app, use it in real world scenarios, get feedback, really involve the union in developing this lone worker program, and the adoption of OK Alone. Really took it nice, slow, and let it grow organically. And then when we finally implemented it, we did it with a small group, got their feedback, constantly talking to the supervisors, the managers, making sure we followed a very stringent management of change process. And then as word spread, like, oh, hey, this is actually very helpful, this is easy to use, other union, how the coworkers will talk to each other through cross department, they were giving positive feedback about our lone worker program. So as each new group enrolled into the program, it was easier and easier, and more people were willing to adopt with it. So I bet the biggest thing is just listening to the workers and what their feedback was, and really just adjusting to what they need, because this tool is for them. I love the tool. I thought the tool was great, and we wanted to make sure it fit for what they do, and without being encumbrance. But it was very easy, and that's the biggest feedback we get. It's super easy to use, so I'm happy about that. It was one of the biggest things that for us, where it wasn't extra equipment. We didn't have we used GeoTab, so there wasn't any extra we had to do. It was just, hey, this is the app on your phone. Here's who's going to use it. Here's a quick training. And even the supervisors management side of it for their administrative accounts, same thing, very easy to use. We also use the 24/7 service, where we don't have where we have them monitor the worker. So if there is a help signal, a missed check-in, they'll field that first touch point, reach out to the worker, and what have you. And there have been a few false alarms, and the response time is another big thing that the workers have appreciated. I've gotten calls from them saying, hey, it actually works. I missed my check-in, and, they're happy that someone's actually watching them, or supervisors will reach out to them when their check-in period's coming. What's it called? When their check-in period is coming up, and it's like, all right, so people are actually watching me. It builds that confidence that we're actually implementing a program, and we're walking the walk and talking the talk. So that's where I would see is the most effective way to help roll out engagement, is really just apply and dedicate yourself to that management of change process. So what were our challenges? I know I did a little bit of a riff on that, but when I saw the poll, I thought it was really important to speak about that. So our challenges, we had that, like I said, limited oversight and delayed awareness if anything happened. A lot of our workers are out there alone. Substations, we go from our territory stretches from Albany all the way down to Westchester, right along the Hudson River. So we have completely rural areas in the middle of nowhere, and we have city like areas where it's row houses of townhouses and very dense populated areas. So we get all different types of terrain, and so we get involved with the not just the task based, but also the public facing. That's another big thing we were worried about. We also through this lone worker program set up 2-man areas. Like, okay, this area due to public facing issues, we're like, all right, only 2 people go out to this area, bare minimum. And this allowed us to keep this structure and visibility on our workers. Next slide, please. So our outcomes, like I was talking about, the biggest thing was our workers actually appreciated. They felt the confidence in when we were rolling this out and implementing it. And me on the safety side and managers have also given positive feedback like this program, just a lone worker program in general that we needed. And this integrating with our lone worker program was very positive feedback and very, confidence. And that was the best thing. And being able to know where our workers are. And if something were to happen, we would have a quick response time. And that was a big thing. We don't want that situation of it's 4 o'clock, where's Joe? Luckily, we have not had an incident like that. Hopefully we don't, but if we do, I'm confident that we'd be able to do a timely response and be able to know where our workers are and be able to communicate any neat help that they need. So yeah, it was straightforward, and I really am enjoying this. So that's it. Thank you. You're muted, Scott.
There we go. Thanks. Thanks, Antonio. All right, before we close, just a genuine thank you very much, Antonio, for your time. Appreciate it, and really helping us learn as well, so we can help kind of custom out the solution that's going to fit your exact organization's need. It's been a great partnership, and look forward to continuing that. First, just a couple of quick takeaways I wanted to run through was, look, lone working risk is real, and it's growing. Field teams are carrying more exposure than ever. Distractions are real across more and unpredictable environments. 2, the gap between when something happens and when your organization knows about it is where outcomes are determined, and that gap is what we can help close. 3, structured workflows that combine automated check-ins, real-time visibility, and a clear escalation path are the practical solutions. Not more complexity, just a more reliable system. If any of that has resonated with you all, thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate any and all feedback. And without further ado, I just want to thank you all again, and
We
I'll
do have
open it
a
up to
couple.
questions.
Yeah, we got a couple questions that came in. And again, if anyone has any questions, please use that Q&A panel and submit them in. Um, the first one was, what happens, and I think you guys kind of covered this, but if someone just ignores the alert, they're busy, they're trying to get the job done, what happens when you ignore it?
Yeah, I can take that. What we do is if they ignore the alert, we build out what we call alert loops. So, someone doesn't respond to it in a timely manner, let's say a minute or 2 minutes, we'll escalate it to that next line of communication or escalation contact. So it's creating a level of redundancy in your procedures that we know people aren't always checking to see what's happening at all times. So you want to make sure you have some different measures of support there. So we recommend from our standpoint, just having at least 3 levels of escalation in case that first line of communication doesn't respond. Uh, so,
Okay. Okay. Another one here.
Wait, just to clarify on that, Antonio does handle that. So it can be internally handled through your organization if you have a dispatch, or Antonio, you can describe kind of how you guys are
Yeah.
handling
So
it.
the way we handle our escalation policy is if someone misses a check-in because they're busy, that 24/7 service is going to field the first call and trying to contact the employee, make sure it's not a false alarm. If they don't reach out and can't get in contact with the employee, they'll call our dispatch center on our emergency line, and then dispatch will take it from there. And that's when we start trying to again contact the employee, just to make sure it's not a false alarm. We'll get their last known location. We get on the radio. We start trying multiple ways to communicate them all simultaneously. We check geotab to see if there's any nearby workers. And then if all else fails, that's when we call emergency services. But yeah, it's just if that check-in's missed, or if we get in contact with the employee and they say, "Hey, my hands are in it right now. I can't get to my phone," we can check in for them via the admin page. But yeah, we if they don't contact us, we send the emergency services.
Okay. Another question here. What is the preset time for a check-in?
I
Maybe
can
that's
answer what we do.
okay.
So
So, real quick,
oh,
sorry,
go,
just
let's
to
go.
jump in, is these are customizable. So that was what your organization chose to do. We can build that for your specific organization, just to clarify. But no, I appreciate that. Antonio, go ahead.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to touch on. Is it's customizable. We chose 1 hour due to how we're set up, but you can choose 8 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours. We chose 1 hour because it's we're focusing on those high energy tasks. So it's a balance between response time and convenience. If you choose 15 minutes, it's just no one's going to be sitting there. But we feel that the hours is good enough for the types of tasks our workers are completing. So it's really based on what are your workers doing and how often do you want to know where they are and check in.
Okay. Another question here. How does this work without signal? And I think you guys covered it, but I think, as a lot of the grids kind of remote, how does that function without maybe a clear signal?
Yeah. So there's kind of a few different ways. So let's say you're in an area with spotty or poor coverage. We offer limited coverage mode. So you might not have Wi-Fi or cellular data, but and maybe you can't even browse the internet. All the alerts and notifications will actually be sent through SMS or an automated phone call. But if you're in an area with zero coverage at all, that's where we pair up our app to devices like Garmin, Zoleo, SpotX, so those premier SATCOM providers. So that gives you that global connectivity, even in those areas where you might not have any cell coverage at all.
Okay.
Geotab
Last,
also, I know they're partnered with Starlink, so we're working with them to help build that out into the integration as well. So when they have signal, we'll have signal as well, and we can
ah,
piggyback off of that.
So we have a lot of rural areas that are zero signal here. No one knows. So we've established part of our loan worker program. So OK Loan takes care of 99% of our situations, but those other situations we have radios where if the radio can work where cell phone doesn't, we'll maybe establish a buddy system. Or if we know we're going into an area that has no signal, we establish pre-communication and post-communication and establish like, hey, I'm going to be in this area for an hour. I'll check in, I'll come back out and check in, or I'll be done XYZ. And you kind of discuss it with your manager and set up a plan beforehand.
okay, I got another one here. And this one it says for Antonio, does your check-in time take into consideration emergency services response times?
Yes. So when we were deciding of how long is too long, so some of our areas can be, like I said, in the middle of nowhere, and it could take 30 minutes for an ambulance to arrive or what have you. So we chose an hour just in case if the moment you check in, you go down, you go through that escalation period and we still can't get in contact with you. It still keeps that window of no one getting to the person as short as possible. So we did consider that. Originally, we may have done like 4 hours, but we're like, no, because sometimes some of our areas response time is just so long because there's only one road in and out. And hospital could be 30, 40 minutes away. So we definitely did consider that.
Okay, and then last one I have right now is how do workers feel about being monitored? And I can jive with this as we move into the technology centered world. How do they like that? How do they feel about it?
A little hesitant at first. But a lot of our, like I said, we have geotab, so they know their trucks are being monitored. We have a lot of smart grids technology integrated, so we know when people are in and out on our working on our lines or going into substation. So we pretty much know where they are already. They all have work cell phones, so we know their location to begin with. But so them accepting the active monitoring, they were a little hesitant, but once they realized, well, a lot of our other technology is already doing that, and they kind of accepted it. Big thing is it's the monitoring's not active unless you're in shift. But they also grew to like that the fact that they're being monitored. So if something does happen, they're like, all right, I'm confident they know where I am. So it's a little bit of the growing pains, but it's all how you phrase it to them and show them how it is beneficial for them versus, Big Brother.
Absolutely. All right. Well, with that, we are out of questions. This will be available again on incident-prevention.com. You can watch that recording, share it with colleagues, and they'll be reaching out to you guys if you have any other additional questions. Please feel free to ask Scott and Ryan. And with that, we thank you guys for being here and spending your time with us. So I'll hand it back to you guys, but thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Antonio. Thanks, Ryan.